Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and before I give a reflection, the first thing I want to do is to say thank you. I've asked so many of you to subscribe because it helps us with this ministry, and you have. I think we have like 700 subscribers now, and I just wanted to say thank you. I'm really grateful for the support. Thanks. And I'd like to offer you some reflections on the gospel for this 15th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And the gospel story is a famous one. It's one that we all know, the Good Samaritan. And I think that this parable is Jesus' most famous of all the parables, because this parable has managed to work its way into not just our faith, but into other faiths. And it cuts across many cultures, many countries. It even has worked its way into the judicial system. Here in our country, in America, we have what's called the Good Samaritan laws. And it's not just here in America. They have Good Samaritan laws in England, in France, in Italy, in Poland, in Russia, they have Good Samaritan laws. And not even in Western countries. In some of the Asian countries that are not heavily Christian at all, they have Good Samaritan laws. In Malaysia, in Japan, and even China. China has Good Samaritan laws. And why has this parable so become part of the worldwide culture? I think because this parable reveals a deep truth about humanity. And it holds up a mirror, and we are invited to look at it and into ourselves. And that deep truth is what we hear Jesus and the scribe in the story talking with each other about what's necessary for eternal life. And the scribe says, basically, love God, love neighbor. And Jesus agrees with him. But then the scribe says, and who is my neighbor? Now that question automatically means that in the scribe's mind, there is someone who is his neighbor that he must love. And there is someone who is not his neighbor that he does not love. And so who's the neighbor? And Jesus answers by giving the parable. And he concludes by asking the scribe, so, who was the neighbor to the man who was robbed? And the scribe's answer tells you everything. The scribe responds by saying, the one who treated him with mercy. The scribe, the Jews, so despised Samaritans, and Samaritans despised the Jews. These two groups hated each other so much that the scribe could not bring himself to say the word Samaritan. Rather, he just described him. And you could see just in this story the depth of the hatred that existed between these two groups. And whenever we see prejudice that is just so blatant and so obvious, it almost takes your breath away. And I think that we would like to think that in our country, in our culture, that we've kind of turned the corner on that, and that we don't have that kind of blatant bigotry. But we do. We do. And that's why this parable is so powerful and so telling, because we are invited to look into that mirror and to ask ourselves, is there any prejudice in my heart? Any bigotry inside, any hatred for a certain culture or a religion or a country or a political party or a neighbor? And I'd like to say, no. I'd like to say that I'm not a bigot. I think we all are. But the truth is, we do carry that within us. And I don't mean that we're, Klansmen or anything, or burning crosses on people's lawns. No. But, people will say, hey, I got nothing against black folk, but when I'm buying a house next to me because, the property values go down. Is there bigotry against people? Yeah, you bet. I mean, think of it this way. Politically, people look at people who voted for Trump and say, what were they thinking? What are these people, stupid or something, voting for Trump? These Trumpers are idiots. Or, thank God I'm not like these left Coast elitists. Those people are such snobs. They think they're better than everybody else. Prejudice against the other? Oh yeah, you bet. And again, it is easy to see the prejudice in another person. Kind of hard to see it in oneself. Easy to see it when, for example, I was doing a wedding one time. And it was a Jewish groom and a Catholic bride. And the bride's dad did not like Jews at all. And I got into a discussion with him and telling him, hey, you know, what are you talking about here? And he said, Father, you don't know Jews the way I know Jews, okay? I had to work for them. You don't know these people like I do. So, you know, we had the wedding, and the bride and groom went down the middle aisle, and the bridesmaids and the groomsmen after. And then the two sets of parents stepped out into the aisle. And the Jewish dad, who was, by the way, a great guy, he was funny, he was fun to be with, he steps out in the aisle and he extends his hand to the other father. And the Catholic dad just stopped for a second and looked. He just looked at that hand. And I thought, oh, come on, take the hand. And finally, he did. But oh my goodness, the depth of what? Prejudice? At the very least, bias? Wow, breathtaking. But again, so easy to see in them and so hard to accept or recognize in myself. I say to my shame, several years ago, I was working in a parish in East LA that took care of this one cemetery that whenever funerals came in from out of town, we would do the funeral. And there was this one clan of gypsies living around Las Vegas that owned several plots there. And so whenever they had a member of their family die, we would cover the funeral. And when I first got there to this parish, there was a gypsy funeral that came in, and a couple of the other priests said, oh God, I don't want to do that funeral. Can you take that funeral? I don't want to do a gypsy funeral. And I thought, what's the big deal? Sure, I'll be glad to do it. And I met with a mortician, and the mortician said to me, hey, Father, don't worry about it. I got this thing taken care of. They tried to give me a check. Cash. Here's the cash, Father. And I thought, take it easy, will you? But then when the funeral time came, it was chaos. People were walking around the church. They were talking on their phones, talking to each other, visiting. Nobody was praying. Nobody was paying attention. One guy in the pew just yelled out, hey, more incense. Where are the bells? It was crazy. And obviously unchurched, but just wrong. And then when we got to the cemetery, nobody was there at the graveside. They were all milling around, eating food and talking. And I said to people, do you want to pray? And so we prayed a little bit, and I went to shake hands afterwards to offer condolences, and nobody would shake my hand. I mean, I offered my hand, no. And one of the brothers said to me, hey, Father, no offense at all, but, you're not gypsy. We don't shake non-gypsy hands. And I just thought, well, excuse me. And then we had another gypsy funeral, and another. And so by the time I did about 3 or 4 gypsy funerals, what was in my heart? Go and get that check. Get that out of here. Give me the cash. Cash. And no knocking around the church either, okay? And quit yelling about the inside. I was starting to treat them all as if they were those wretched people. Prejudice? Bias? Yeah, you bet. So today, this gospel is presented to us once again. And Jesus is talking to us as he did to the scribe. And he asks us, do you have a neighbor whose very name you don't want to speak aloud, as that scribe could not bring himself to speak the name of the Samaritan? We have to look inside ourselves. We have to see if there is prejudice there. We have to answer that question of Jesus, because that is what leads us to everlasting life.